The garage smelled of stale coffee, burnt transmission fluid, and the kind of suffocating stagnation that settled into your lungs like wet silt. It was a space defined by the things that didn't move. A rusted stack of radiator cores in the corner, a calendar from 3 years ago hanging by a single bent nail, and the '78 Firebird hovering on hydraulic jacks like a disemboweled beast. Caleb stood over the engine block, his hands slick with a mixture of grease and fresh blood from a knuckle he'd split against the manifold. He didn't reach for a rag. He just stared at the fuel injectors, his eyes hollowed out by the flickering yellow light of a hanging halogen bulb. Lena stood in the doorway of the office, a clipboard tucked under her arm, watching the way his shoulder muscles twitched. She'd been watching him for hours. She'd seen him bypass the fuel regulator, pushing the PSI levels into territory that would liquefy a lesser engine. It wasn't tuning anymore. It was an execution.
"The block won't take it, Cal,"
she said, her voice cutting through the hum of the overhead fans. Caleb didn't look up. He adjusted the torque on a bolt, his movements mechanical, precise, and devoid of joy.
It's not meant to last for a circuit, Lena. It's meant to hold together for one night. Just one.
"And after that night? You think the world ends because you hit a finish line first? You're killing yourself for a ghost."
Caleb finally straightened, the movement fluid and predatory. He turned toward her, his face obscured by the shadow of his grease-stained cap.
He's not a ghost. He's a choice. He chose the city, the light, and the silence. And he left this graveyard for me. Do you really think I'm going to let him keep the crown when he couldn't even keep his word?
Lena walked into the workspace, her boots crunching on metal shavings. She stopped a few feet from him, her gaze traveling to the wall where they used to keep a photo of the three of them, the Foundations of Dust era. The photo was gone now, replaced by a complex schematic of a custom-fabricated intake manifold.
"You're wasting it,"
she said softly.
"All that talent. You have a touch for machines that people in the city would kill for. You could be building platforms for championships, designing components that actually matter. Instead, you're turning this shop into a tomb."
Caleb let out a low, humorless laugh that sounded like gravel grinding in a barrel. He picked up a wrench, feeling the cold weight of it in his palm.
I'm not wasting anything, Lena. I'm refining my assets. I've spent years learning how to build things that last, while he spent years learning how to break them. When he comes back, and he will come back, because he's an addict, and his addiction is the roar of an engine he doesn't own, I'll be the one to show him exactly what he left in the dirt.
He doesn't care, Cal. That's the part you're missing. Jax isn't coming back for you. He's coming back to prove he can outrun the version of himself that was once your brother.
Then he's going to have a very hard time when the pavement realizes who it belongs to.
Caleb snapped. He turned back to the Firebird, his fingers trembling, not from exhaustion, but from a static charge of pure, focused resentment. He gripped the manifold, his knuckles turning white. He wasn't just building a car, he was building a weapon. Every valve seat he ground, every piston he balanced, was a rehearsal for the moment he would finally force Jax to acknowledge that the life he'd thrown away hadn't just withered. It had curdled into something sharper and more dangerous than anything the city could produce. Lena sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of years. She knew the conversation was over. The look in his eyes wasn't the spark of ambition. It was the dull, heavy heat of a forge.
I ordered the titanium rods,
Lena said, turning toward the office.
They'll be here Tuesday. But if you blow this motor in testing, I'm not ordering another set. You're on your own, Cal. This isn't a project anymore. It's a funeral.
Good.
Caleb muttered to the empty air as she walked away.
Maybe I'll finally get some peace when the last of it burns.
He leaned into the engine bay, his face inches from the intake, and began to tighten the final bolts. The garage went quiet, save for the rhythmic tink-tink of cooling metal, and the distant, lonely howl of the wind whipping through the skeletal remains of the junkyard outside. He imagined the sound of a high-revving engine screaming through the industrial district, the neon lights fracturing against the windshield, and the look of cold shock he would carve onto Jax's face. It was a beautiful, terrible fantasy. And as he wiped the blood from his hand onto his jeans, he knew he would feed everything he had, his time, his money, his sanity, into the hungry maw of that machine, until it was either the fastest thing on the asphalt or a heap of scrap metal as hollow as the man he had become. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was the architect of his own wreckage, and for the first time in years, he felt a strange, jagged sense of purpose. The horizon outside was dark, featureless, and infinite, but inside the garage, the path ahead was perfectly, violently clear. The city didn't sleep, it vibrated. It was a low-frequency hum that lived behind Jax's ribs, a steady pulse of strobe lights and burning high-octane fuel. Jax sat in his apartment, a sterile, glass-walled eyrie 40 stories above the grid. Below, the metropolis stretched out like a motherboard, veins of traffic glowing white and red. He stared at his own reflection in the darkened window. He looked like the man he'd promised himself he'd become. Sharp, clean, successful. But in the dim light, the ghost of the junkyard boy still sat behind his eyes, waiting for a cue. He poured a glass of amber liquid, the ice clinking, a lonely, metallic sound. He didn't drink it. He set it down on a drafting table covered in engine schematics that didn't look anything like the crude, hand-drawn blueprints he and Caleb used to sketch on the back of discarded pizza boxes. These were sophisticated, cold, mathematical. The city's underground circuit was supposed to be the finish line. He had won the midnight heat in the industrial district of the West End 3 nights in a row. He held the fastest lap time on the harbor loop. He was the ghost, the man who materialized at the starting line, claimed the pot, and vanished before the police sirens even reached the horizon. Yet, as he traced the line of a modified intake manifold with his fingertip, the satisfaction felt hollow. It wasn't a victory, it was a transaction. He was trading sweat for status, but the account never balanced. Every time he crossed the finish line, he expected the adrenaline to reach a fever pitch, but it stopped short. It stayed stagnant, like a car idling in a dead-end alley. He walked to his private garage, a floor of the building converted into a shrine for his machine. It was a custom-built chassis, refined, aggressive, and soullessly perfect. He ran a rag over the hood. It felt like touching cold stone.
You're bored, Jax,
he whispered to the machine. The engine didn't answer. It lacked the erratic, volatile spirit of the old Firebird, the one that used to spit oil and demand a kickstart every time the temperature dropped below 50 degrees. He thought of Caleb. The memory hit him with the force of a head-on collision. He hadn't thought about the way Caleb used to tap the dashboard. 3 quick knocks, a superstition they'd invented to ward off the cops. He hadn't thought about the smell of that old shop, the mix of wet pine, ozone, and scorched rubber that seemed to cling to Caleb's skin like a second layer. Jax gripped the rim of the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. The city, with all its lights and accolades, suddenly felt like a cage. He was a professional in a world of amateurs, yet he felt like a fraud. He had climbed the mountain only to realize he'd left his lungs at the bottom. He grabbed his phone. A notification blinked on the screen. An invitation to the Outlaw Invitational back in the valley, the forgotten industrial stretch where they had learned to drive. The organizers were bragging about the prize money, a pathetic amount compared to what he made in a week, but the location caught his throat.
Hometown.
The word tasted like copper. He knew with a sudden sinking clarity that he couldn't stay here. The city was too curated. It lacked the friction he needed. He was addicted to the win, but he was starving for a real challenge, something that mattered. something that carried the weight of everything he had walked away from. He looked at the engine block of his car. It was perfect. It was engineered to win, but it was built to operate in a vacuum. It didn't know how to handle the dirt, the ruts, or the history. He went to his computer, his fingers flying across the keys. He pulled up the maps of the old hometown industrial zone, the abandoned rail yards, the cracked asphalt of the loading docks, the roads that didn't show up on any modern GPS. He saw the coordinates, the familiar layout of the starting line near the cooling towers. He felt a dark, exhilarating pulse of heat in his gut. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the reputation. He needed to go back. Not to apologize. He didn't know how to do that, and the word felt like a foreign language. But to settle the ledger. He needed to prove that he had outgrown the boy who held the flashlight while Caleb did the heavy lifting. He needed to show that he was more than just a ghost haunting the streets of the city. He needed to see if the fire he had left behind was still burning, or if it had finally gone cold in the shadow of the junkyard. He began to dismantle the intake system, his movements becoming frantic, almost surgical. He wasn't just preparing a car for a race, he was preparing a weapon for a homecoming. As he tightened the last bolt, his hands were stained with fresh grease. For the first time in years, the smell wasn't just chemicals, it was memory. It was the grit under his fingernails that he used to scrub away every single night after work. He stepped back and looked at the car. It looked ready to hunt. He'd return to the valley. He'd line up on the asphalt that had once been their playground. He'd show the world, and most importantly, he'd show himself, that the ghost had no loyalty to anyone but the needle on the speedometer. If the past was standing in his way, he would go through it. The realization crystallized. The void in his chest wasn't a lack of achievement. It was the absence of a true adversary. Someone who knew exactly where the cracks in his armor were, because they'd helped him build it. He turned off the garage lights, plunging the room into darkness. His silhouette merged with the shadows of the car, a seamless blend of man and machine. "I'm coming back," he whispered to the empty, echoing space. The promise felt like a lead weight in his stomach, but for the first time in years, the hum in his chest stopped vibrating. It sharpened. It became a focus, a blade, a singular, cutting intent. He wouldn't be leaving the city to find peace. He would be leaving to finally, definitively, bury the boy he used to be.